other reason the campaign was so good is that Ann Wagner came back from being an ambassador in Luxembourg, having been the co-chairman of the National Party. She could have done a lot of things, and I called her and said, I'd like to sit down and talk to you and Ray. And what I wanted to talk about was, would you be the chairman of my Senate campaign? There was no second choice. Fortunately, she didn't make me make a second choice, and we had a great time. There is nobody that's introduced me more times than Ann Wagner. And from that introduction tonight, you can see why that's the way I want it. In fact, Chairman Martin, I didn't say, could you get Ann Wagner to introduce me, but if you'd have asked who should introduce me, I'd have probably said Ann Wagner and been glad to do it. Blaine Luetkemeyer, we had, you know, I miss the House. Even if the House doesn't get anything done that can finally be done, the House is always doing things, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But Chairman, you mentioned all the speakers. First time I came to Lincoln Day, there weren't very many speakers. 1980, there was a Speaker of the House, but he went on our side. And there was a President Pro Tem of the Senate, and he went on our side. And there were 2-1 margins in the General Assembly, but they had them, we didn't have them. And there were 2 members of Congress from one of the 2 political parties, and it was our party, not their party. And we hadn't reached the point yet where there was a majority of county officials who were Republicans, not Democrats. We got to that point in November of last year. The idea that there'd be a 2-1 margin in the General Assembly and it would be us was about as far removed from anything we could think about as you could imagine. There was a lieutenant governor at Lincoln Day that year. It was Bill Phelps. And Bill Phelps is here tonight. Bill, where are you? Bill Phelps had just proved that you could be lieutenant governor and you could be re-elected lieutenant governor, and nobody's proved that now more often than Peter Kinder. Peter, to have you serve in that job is a great thing. Tom Schweik, the most important race in America as far as Missouri Republicans are concerned next year is the state auditor's race in Missouri. The rare time when we only have one statewide race, and we need to make the most of it. Chairman Martin and I and others, I'm absolutely committed to be sure we figure out the model in 2014 that produces the results we need, not just in 2014, but in 2016. And as Ann said, let's not forget Jason Smith. Surely they don't like the fact that there are 6 of us and 2 of them in Washington, D.C. in the House of Representatives. And nationally, nothing national Democrats would like better than to show what they want to have happen in 2014. In fact, I thought the President's speech this week, where I sat by John Barrasso on the leaders row, the escort committee row, right behind the cabinet, that they were standing up most of the time, so we didn't get to see very much where we were seated, even though it was the 3rd row from where the President was. I thought that speech was a lot more about November 2014 than it was anything that's about to happen in 2013. I've been to lots of State of the Union messages. Normally there's some thread in there somewhere where you think there might really be something here that could happen. But the thread in that speech was, the President was saying, I'd really like a Democrat House of Representatives in 2014, and if we can keep the Democrat Senate, we'll just do whatever we want to do. The last 2 years of Barack Obama would be like the first 2 years of Barack Obama, and surely we're not going to let that happen. And really the first shot toward whether we're going to let that happen or not is Jason Smith in our state, and a contribution and a volunteer card couldn't be more important. I sent my contribution the other day, and I put in my volunteer card, and I'm looking forward to spending time with Jason in Washington and in the 8th District between now and that June election. I will make 3 predictions if we hold on to the House and make the kind of gains we ought to make, but if you just hold on to the House, I'll make 3 predictions, assuming we hold on to the House in 2014. One is there will be no more new taxes under this administration. No more new taxes. They're going to have to be satisfied with the 1% of taxpayers that they were able to get a tax increase on. And we're going to stay right where we are with the 99% that didn't. No more new taxes. Spending cuts will occur March the 1st. Sequestration will happen. And the President's choice, are you going to make the cuts the way the law now requires them to be made, or are you going to propose some other cuts that we might accept? You know, the leverage has totally changed since late last year. In November and December last year, frankly, everybody's taxes were going to go up unless we could figure out some way to leverage the President into some agreement where that wouldn't happen. And frankly, I know a lot of people thought no taxes should go up, but they all went up at midnight at the end of the year. And within 72 hours of that, for 99% of taxpayers, they all are going to continue to benefit from the good tax policies of the last decade. In fact, I called President Bush the day the House passed the bill that the Senate already passed. I said, well, Mr. President, I've got this headline from the Washington Post on my desk, and it's the top right-hand corner in big capital letters. It says, broad support for Bush tax policies. I said, I don't recall that being the headline in 2001 or 2003, either one, but what you did obviously makes sense and stood the test of time. So no new taxes, spending cuts will happen, and the third prediction is, the more people find out about the President's health care bill, the less they're going to like it. We're going to talk about it. I'll make one other prediction. Unlike Lance Armstrong, Harry Reid will never be accused of taking performance-enhancing drugs. There is no performance enhancement with Harry Reid. How many of you have an iPad?
Yeah, I got it.
A bunch of people have, not with you, just have one. He has two.
Yeah.
How many of you have an iPad? Nobody had one the last time the Senate passed a budget. Because the iPad hadn't been invented yet. We're now right at the edge of the 4th year since the Senate passed a budget. But John Barrasso and I voted for the bill, as Ann Wagner did, and said, no budget, no pay. No budget, no pay. And I think that means we have a chance to see some appropriations bills as well, but it is time to get things done. You know, how much out of control do we want things to be? In 1981, Ronald Reagan, at his inauguration, tried to deal with the concept of $1 trillion because the entire national debt was about to get to $1 trillion. And he said in his inaugural speech, he said, if you had a stack of $1,000 bills 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. But $1 trillion is a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high. You want to write that down, so it's 4 inches, you're a millionaire, $1,000 stack of $1,000 bills. 67 miles, it's $1 trillion, according to Ronald Reagan. Actually, he just guessed it was about 80 miles, so they got a measuring stick and they figured out 67 miles. Now the annual deficit under Barack Obama's been $1 trillion and $1 trillion and $1 trillion, and suddenly we owe 16 times 67 miles. 16 times 67 miles. We've got somebody here tonight who's going to talk about healthcare like nobody else can. John Barrasso, my colleague from Wyoming, and I'm so pleased he's here. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He was the head of the Wyoming Medical Society. Pretty good credentials, by the way. He was the Wyoming Doctor of the Year. He got really the kind of attention that we needed to get every week when he gives Dr. Barrasso's second opinion on health care. And the more we know, the more second opinions you have to have, because the worse and worse it gets. But that's not the only thing John Barrasso does, or we do together. We just recently, the President got slapped on the hand by 3 of the judges of the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. for appointing the three members of the National Labor Relations Board. This is the group where Jerry Hunter used to be the chief counsel. So if you've got any questions about the legality of what they've been doing, ask Jerry Hunter. The court said all 3 of these people are there unconstitutionally. You can't just decide, you're going to decide whether the Senate's in session or not, and say, well, I decided the Senate's not in session, so I'm going to appoint these 3 people to that, and the other guy to the consumer affairs, and that guy that does the consumer protection job, he is the only person that makes rules and regulations. We've got thousands of rules and regulations that those 2 agencies that this court ruling is upheld are all unconstitutional. And so John Barrasso and I immediately put in legislation to, one, the Barrasso legislation that I co-sponsored was they have to stop doing everything they're doing. No more new rules and regulations. And the one he co-sponsored with me is, and no pay and no money to enforce any of the rules and regulations they already put in. When I introduced the right of conscience amendment to fight back on the Obama administration's view and their rule that you can make religious people and religious institutions do anything you want to make them do, no matter how it conflicts with their religious rights. John Barrasso was one of the most fierce advocates of that idea of protecting people's religious liberty. The government cannot take, the reason we called it the right of conscience amendment, President Jefferson wrote the New London Methodist, and in that letter he said, of all the rights we have, the right of conscience is the one we should protect the most vigorously. It's the last right we should let the government take away from us, is the right to practice what we believe. And you can't make other people do things they want to. John, the Post-Dispatch on the editorial page today said that you and I shouldn't have voted against the Violence Against Women Act. Well, technically they didn't say you shouldn't have, they said I shouldn't have. But it's okay because Phyllis said we should have voted against the Violence Against Women Act. Not because we're for that, but we want to see that people are all protected in the right way, in the same way. One of our leaders in the Senate, who every week hosts our policy meeting, who knows more about policy, I think, than anybody else in the Senate, and certainly in healthcare. And Dr. Barrasso, I'll remind you that in August of 2010, the voters of Missouri were the first voters anywhere to get a chance to say what they thought about the President's health care plan, and 72% of them said, we don't want to do it. That was the second opinion from Missouri voters, but the second opinion from John Barrasso is week after week pointing out how this law and this path will ruin health care in America. We're lucky to have him here tonight. We're lucky to have him here in the Senate. I'm lucky to be able to count him one of my good friends, Senator John Barrasso.